Welcome, everyone, to tonight on the Occult Rejects. We're biting into a very specific kind of forbidden fruit, the kind that doesn't promise purity or certainty at all, or even maybe uncertainty. It promises paradigm whiplash. Our guest on the Occult Rejects is Thumper Forge, also known as Horkos, a Gardnerian high priest, a voice in modern pagan media, and someone who moves comfortably between traditional witchcraft structures and the grinning, reality-bending current of chaos magic and Discordianism. His book, The Chaos Apple, Magic and Discordianism for the Postmodern Witch, is a guide to weaponizing belief as a tool, bending it, swapping it, breaking it, and rebuilding it, while dancing with Eris and laughing at the parts of the universe that take themselves a little bit too seriously. So, if you've ever wondered whether magic is about faith, focus, story, psychology, or a cosmic prank that still somehow works, this episode tonight is here for you. Boom. Beautiful. So on this fine Occult Rejects time, we should probably introduce the panel of brilliant rejects. As you can tell in the far corner, we have the Cardinal Electric Head himself, the King of Kings, the great Nicholas. I'm using his voice and I'm throwing it over to him. Introduce yourself, Nick.
What is up? What's going on? Thank you so much. That was amazing. Oh, that was great. Yeah. For people wondering, my roadcaster isn't working and it's just a complete mess. So I'm using the laptop and whatever. So thank you very much for doing the introduction. I never could have done it as well as you, or even sounded, the audio quality wouldn't have sounded as well either. So yeah, I think I'm gonna have to start using you now on actually. So
yeah, please.
Because I hate doing intros. I really do. So you got the job. No, thanks. But yeah, I really appreciate it, Brandon. Thumper, I'm really excited to have you on. Like I was saying before, I want to tell people too, his book. Yeah, I read, I don't know, probably maybe the first 40 pages. Just keeping it real. But it reads completely different than most. Like it really was something that I was like, I feel like I'm being told a story time. You know what I'm saying? Or it's like one of my boys like having a funny conversation with me. Or like we're hanging out, So it's a really good read, and I'm promoting it because it's just written a little bit differently and I liked it. So I'm really excited to have you on, and there is a lot of information actually in there. That is one thing I'll say. You're not going to get some chaos magic book that is like, it was all right, not too bad. There's a ton of information in this shit, ton. So definitely check it out. And Thumper, thank you so much for coming on, man. Again, I was really excited to have you on, and I guess I'll pass it on to Judith. What is going? No, Jen. My bad. We'll get Jen because I'll forget about it up there.
No problem. I'm cool if Judith went ahead of me, but I'll take it.
No, then I'll forget you at the top, and then I'll fuck it all up.
Well, what's up, boss? Thank you so much, Mr. 93, and of course, Brother Brandon, for that amazing intro for the whole show. I'm Jin the Ninja. I host a show called Threshold Saints, and we'll try out my new tagline, which is Chaos, Love, and Hyperstition in the Aeon of Flux. So if you are interested in my show, Threshold Saints, you can check it out on IG, Spotify, and of course, my Substack, which is thresholdsaints.substack.com, as well as at Threshold Saints on IG and X Twitter, or you can follow me on my personal account at Wukong Reborn, which is WUKONG Reborn. And I have a lot of episodes coming out, and a very, very, very special episode with David Heim Smith coming up. And it's going to be pretty epic. So look out for that. And I'm really excited. Obviously my background is more chaos magic. So this is kind of the kind of show that I would love to do. And so I appreciate everybody on the panel, and thank you so much, Thumper and Nick, for having me on.
Nice. No, thank you, sir. Actually, I think I got that guy coming on soon myself. Ike Baker wanted to actually try to come on with him, so we were going to schedule a date. So nice. Look forward to that coming out, Jen. Robbie, what is going on, sir? How are you?
Yes, doing great. Been working on illustrations and just a lot of pushing ink the last few weeks. I'm Robbie Marks, or R Marks, artist illustrator. And if anybody wants to check out any of my other stuff, I have my MetaMindcast podcast, as well as all my miscellaneous art on my social media, etc., etc. But you can check out my Linktree, which is Linktree RMARX, and that'll pull up everything for you. And yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited about this.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robbie. And last but not least, the loon herself, Judith. What is up?
Hi, thank you for having me. I am so excited for this discussion. Unfortunately, I haven't read the book yet, but I am motivated to read the book. You could catch me on YouTube and on X as the Loon. I do more of self-inner development, and I have an episode coming with one-on-one with Dr. Rachel. You remember her, Nick. And we're just going to have two occult females having a chat, and I have a couple of more things coming up. So check me out on Twitter and on X.
Nice. Get it, Judith. Get it. That is what's up. Nice. Awesome. All right. So Thumper, unfortunately, it's like the same question I ask everybody who comes on the show that's into the occult. What got you into this? Like, how did you find yourself one day saying, oh, this is what I'm going to get into, and I'm going to make this a life journey?
When I was about 12 years old, I was flipping through a newspaper in like my parents' sitting room, and I found there was an article about a coven of witches going to see the witches of Eastwick in the theater, and it was sort of a fluffy kind of human interest piece. And I think in retrospect it may have been Laurie Cabot and her coven, but I didn't realize that there were actual witches in the world. And so 12-year-old me looked up and looked at my parents and said, I'm going to be a witch. And my good Episcopalian parents were like, maybe we table this. We don't focus on it for now. But that got the idea stuck in my head. And I had always been interested in mythology and different religion. And just so in my late teens and early 20s, I just started reading a bunch of books on witchcraft and paganism. And in my late 20s, I was very skeptical about a lot of the things I was reading, especially when it came to Wicca. So I went and found a Gardnerian coven because I was like, where did this come from? Like, you guys have to, like, I wanted to know like the reality behind it. And I ended up sticking with that, and then eventually stumbled into Discordianism kind of by accident. It was very similar in that Eris had always been my favorite goddess when I would read about mythology, and then to learn that there was a whole religion devoted to her really just struck a chord with me. And not long after that, I fell into chaos magic, and so I've been kind of doing all of the above ever since.
Nice. What is it now as we get into this book? What was it with this book for, I guess, chaos magic and Discordianism that you thought was different, or that they needed this book? Like, what's different about this book than what's out there already? What did you think you were handing to the people that's a little different, if there was?
What I really wanted to focus on was the idea of chaos witchcraft. Especially in online spaces, there's been sort of a growing identity of the chaos witch. A lot of people identifying as chaos witches, and nobody really knowing what that meant. People kind of having a very broad general idea of chaos magic, people having a very broad general idea of witchcraft, and combining the two as an identity, but not really knowing what that meant, or having any direction as to what they should do with that. So that's who I was really trying to write for. Is, if you want to be a chaos witch, great. Here are resources for you. Here is information about that specifically.
Nice. Does anybody have any questions before I keep going? No. All right. I know you. I mean, I think you mentioned also Gardnerian witchcraft and all that stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you want to give like maybe a little bit of an idea for people what that is? Because I'll be totally honest, I've never really had anybody on the show for that either. So like, some people might be interested just getting a little bit of an idea of like what actually does that entail.
Gardnerian Wicca or Gardnerian witchcraft, the best way to think about it is, it was what came like a generation before Wicca. The very condensed history is, there was this British guy named Gerald Gardner who had been living overseas for a number of years, retired, moved back to England, and got involved with a Rosicrucian order in the New Forest area of England. And in that group, in that organization, he met kind of an inner circle of people who called themselves witches. And who really all they wanted to do was like practice witchcraft and punch Nazis. And he fell in with them. And that was in 1939. In 1951, I think it was when the anti-witchcraft laws in England were repealed. And by 1954, he had published a book called Witchcraft Today, which basically said, I am a witch and I am part of a coven, and here's a little bit about us. It's an initiatory practice, so you have to go through an initiation to be a part of it. It is oath-bound, meaning you take oaths at initiation not to reveal the things that you've been experiencing. But modern Wicca, or the idea of Wicca, kind of grew out of that. Some people who came along shortly after he passed away in 1964 had kind of found the word Wicca and were identifying themselves as Wiccan versus just calling themselves witches, and that word stuck. But the Gardnerian tradition is just sort of the precursor to what we now know as Wicca.
Thank you.
Side note, Gerald Gardner was initiated into the OTO by Aleister Crowley.
He did. He was given a charter by Crowley in some point in the mid to late 40s, where
1947.
Thank you. Yeah, he didn't ever really do anything with the charter, and there is floating around out there. There is like Aleister Crowley's handwritten charter that Gardner kind of got from him on Crowley's deathbed. So he did have proof that he was a member, or that he had authority within the OTO, although he didn't ever really pursue that. And while he was in the early, in his kind of the early days of his practice, he incorporated a lot of Crowley into his witchcraft, and then some of the witches who came along to practice with him took they called it Crowleyanity, and they pulled it all out and replaced it with their own original writings. So the Crowley didn't get passed down along with everything else.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah, I think I had somebody on the show recently where I think we were talking about the charge of the goddess and how much that seemed to like was even very heavily taken from Aleister Crowley, I think, in the Book of the Law.
Yeah, a couple of sources. It came from, there was the Book of the Law influenced it. There was also a passage in Charles Godfrey Leland's Aradia Gospel of the Witches, which was published in 1899. But a lot of this also ended up getting filtered through a woman named Doreen Valiente, who Gardner initiated in 1953, and she rewrote a lot of stuff, including the Charge of the Goddess.
Nice. If you can, also, because I've only had like maybe 2 people on for Chaos Magic too. Can you give me definitions, I guess, chaos magic versus discordium and witchcraft? Like, where do they overlap, and where do they? I mean, they kind of overlap a little bit, maybe. Yeah. Could you maybe give that definition to people?
Sure. Chaos magic is, I would love to say it's we get together and shoot chaos from our hands, or that we're like, out in the ether doing chaotic things, but it's really just an experimental approach to magical practice with an emphasis on getting results. The idea of chaos, in modern context, people tend to see it as meaning chaotic or meaning frenetic or kind of undisciplined or all over the place. But within the framework of chaos magic, the chaos is more of the Greek idea of chaos, sort of like the primordial entity that existed before anything else. So chaos is potential. And within chaos magic, the idea is to take potential and turn it into not only possibility, but probability, if that makes sense. Yeah. And the idea of chaos also kind of promotes the idea that we can kind of go in any direction we want to accomplish our goals. If you think of, you've probably seen the Chaos Star, the kind of 8-pointed star with the arrows.
Yes.
That was kind of conceived by an author named Peter J. Carroll, who attached a different color of magic to each arrow. which he sort of lifted from the Kabbalistic tree of life. If you move, like moving through the
I was just
Sephiroth,
thinking
has its own color. In Hermetic Kabbalah, you start in Malkuth, you start at the earth, and then you kind of work your way up through the different spheres as part of the great work to, become part of the divine or merge with the divine. In chaos magic, we're in the center and we can go off in any direction we want to, based on what our interest is or what we're trying to accomplish. So that is, in a nutshell, what chaos magic is. Discordianism is a modern parody religion based on the worship of the Greek goddess Eris, who is the goddess of discord, who is sort of a minor player in classical Greek mythology. But the founders of Discordianism in the late 50s learned of, read something about Greek mythology and learned there was a goddess of discord, and they thought that was hilarious. So they decided to base a religion around her. It was absolutely supposed to be a joke. It was supposed to be a parody of organized religion and just sort of a way to skewer organized religion, but it caught on and people started taking it seriously. So there are a lot of people out there taking the not serious very, very seriously and practicing a religion based on that. And then witchcraft that's one of those things where if you ask 10 people, get 11 answers. But in my mind, witchcraft is just unauthorized magic. It is magical practice that is not approved of by whatever the authorities or dominant groups happen to be in a given culture. Chaos magic practitioners tend to refer to themselves as magicians because they're still kind of working within a societal structure. A chaos witch, on the other hand, is working sort of outside of the dominant paradigm and kind of doing their own thing, not only for their own benefit, but to kind of do what they can to influence the world around them. Hopefully any of that made sense. I can try again. It didn't.
Well, and you said, Eris, I mean, she is a rather minor character in regard to the whole story of Discord and sowing that chaos and rolling that golden apple in for the goddesses to determine, which one is the most beautiful. But at the same time, she's also the spark or the catalyst that started the Trojan War.
Exactly.
Yeah. The thing with Eris, and I mentioned this in the Chaos Apple, the thing with her, with that kind of foundational myth of the wedding of Thetis,
right,
is that at any time someone could have made a different decision and prevented the Trojan War. Eris gave them opportunities, and all they had to do was make a different decision. In my mind, if you're at a wedding banquet and a golden apple marked for the fairest rolls into the room, you give it to the bride. It's her special day.
Right.
But the goddesses didn't do that. The reason they were having a wedding was because Zeus had arranged a marriage because there was a prophecy that any son of Thetis would overthrow him. So he was trying to prevent that from happening. The goddesses all tried to bribe the judge. Hermes, could have picked a different judge. It was one bad decision after another. And so the fault of it can't really lie with Eris. All she did was throw an apple into the room. And everybody made the bad decisions that resulted in the mess.
Well, and that's the chaos.
Yeah. That is the Discord. But yeah, she's painted as the villain of the story. In retrospect, she was the maligned one.
Yeah.
And an interesting story about the Principe Discordia, or the Lord Omar Khayyam, the guy who wrote it. Carrie Thornley, interesting enough, has his own chaos, which is he was brought in on charges of assassinating JFK. And so a lot of people thought that so he has this whole thing where he was maybe brainwashed into thinking, or like a Manchurian style candidate that, because Oswald was kind of thrown to the wolves, but at the same time, Carrie Thornley wrote a book before the Principe Discordia that talked about this defector who was upset with the United States, and that was actually Oswald himself. So they actually knew each other, Oswald and Carrie Thornley.
They did. I believe they were roommates at one point. The two guys wrote the Principe Discordia. There was Greg Hill, who renamed himself Malaclipse the Younger, and Carrie Thornley, who renamed himself Lord Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst. And Greg Hill was like an IBM programmer and was sort of this very chill, quiet guy. Kerry Thornley was very countercultural, and wrote a whole book about, like you were saying, kind of talking about his old buddy Lee Harvey Oswald, and he ended up under a lot of scrutiny because of that. Like, I don't know that he thought that decision through very well.
Well, it's interesting how he became the very chaos that Kerry Thornley was the very chaos that he was talking about. It's very meta, if you got this many layered nature of what's going on in the conspiratorial realms of the 60s with the JFK assassination. And then all of a sudden the same guy coincidentally creates the Principle of Discordia and this very thing that was disrupting the 60s counterculture, which some think wasn't even counterculture, that actually was an inorganic creation of the CIA's MK Ultra program.
Right.
Yeah. And it's funny that you would mention that, because in an interview one time, somebody asked Kerry Thornley if he thought Eris was real, because like I was saying earlier, the idea of this religion was supposed to be a joke. It was supposed to be parody. It wasn't supposed to be taken seriously. And so somebody asked Thornley, is Eris real? And his response was, if I knew this was all going to come true, I would have picked Venus.
Then that's funny.
It was very much, they did not mean to create something, but by not intending to do so, they ended up, creating this religion that ended up being very real for a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
All right. Anybody have any questions before I ask more?
I actually have a couple questions about Discordianism.
Please.
Thumper, who would you say is, I know you addressed some of them, but who would you say are important Discordians for people to be aware of? Because I know it's a kind of a controversial label, one that people have cast aspersions against me sometimes, simply because of some of my work on Tracy Twyman and association with some left-hand path people. So I just want to hear, like, who do you think is interesting Discordians that people should know about, and do you have any connections with a greater network?
So the Discordians I think people should probably know about are, as we were talking before we went on, Robert Anton Wilson, who, outside of the Principia Discordia, his works were very influential to Discordianism, and he built on some ideas that became kind of core to Discordianism.
Mm-hmm.
The Discordians that people don't know are Discordians, and this is going to be a very Gen X kind of thing. But have you ever heard of a band called the KLF?
Mm-hmm.
Or they were sometimes known as the Time Lords. They had a couple of hits in the 90s, 3 a.m. Eternal. They had one song where Tammy Wynette, they were kind of a dance band, but Tammy Wynette was the lead singer on one of their songs. If you've ever gone to a basketball game and you hear the Doctor Who song, the Doctor Who, that was the KLF as the Time Lords. But they were a Discordian band, and they worked a lot of Discordian concepts into their lyrics. And they were huge in Britain. They had a few hits in the US, but they were huge overseas. And their fame kind of came to an end because one day they announced that they were going to burn £1 million. Basically, £1 million being just British currency. They were going to burn $1 million worth of it. And so they went out to like a boathouse and they piled up stacks of British pound notes and into $1 million and set it on fire. And there were news crews there, and they burned £1 million, and everybody sort of stood there awkwardly. And then the news crews just turned off their cameras and left. And it was I think it was very meaningful for them, or they felt like they were doing something very meaningful. And afterwards they were like, crap, we just destroyed a bunch of money. And they kind of realized that there wasn't really a point to it after all. Those are the names that I think, in terms of like Discordianism quietly influencing pop culture, those are the names I think people should know. There are other authors out there like Adam Golightly and Brenton Clutterbuck who have done a lot of research into the history of Discordianism, and who are publishing books that have a lot of information that people just don't normally have access to. So anyone who's interested in Discordianism should definitely look up those authors. And then there is a website called principiadiscordia.com, which has the Principia online free to read and with forums where a lot of just random Discordian concepts get tossed around in the forums as well.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. That was a great answer.
Well, thank you.
I do want to ask this. Someone paid $5 for it. So, do you know the relationship between Discordianism and intuitionism, mathematics?
I do not actually.
Oh.
Interesting. This isn't the correct answer, obviously, but there is a answer, and that answer would be maybe so in Principia Discordia or in Discordianism, they have the law of fives, right? And then there's also the idea of 23 skidoo, which is also then put into the Book of Lies, a whole chapter called 23 skidoo, which is basically get out as fast as possible. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so throughout the Illuminatus trilogy, there was the 2 + 3 = 5. There's the 2 to the 2 = 3 degrees. As you walk up the Kabbalist tree of life, which is the degree structure of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And so what they do is they play, and then in the Taoist Yin Yang symbol, they actually Principia Discordia took that as their symbol, but instead of the 2 circles, 1 black, 1 white, it's 1 is the apple and 1 is the pentagon, which is 5 then. So it's order and chaos. And then
Order and
discord. Thank you. And so it's like maybe that could be related mathematically to whatever they're talking about.
It certainly could be. And I will say, hopefully this ties in, that a lot of, just as the internet was about to become a thing, a lot of computer programmers were both chaos magicians and Discordians. In England, when chaos magic was sort of building steam in the 70s, it was heavily influenced by ceremonial magic. When it kind of got imported to the States, it got heavily influenced by Discordianism. So all these kind of early computer programmers were heavily influenced by Discordian and chaos magic as they were constructing the internet.
Also, you have William Burroughs' 23 theory that he has with the ship captains and all that going. And later got kind of picked up within Robert Anton Wilson and the Illuminatus kind of trilogy.
Yeah. Within Discordianism, as was mentioned, there is the law of fives, that everything somehow equals 5. And through that, the number 23 became sacred because 2 + 3 is 5. But the 23 enigma is a crazy thing to deep dive into. Yeah. In terms of the number of bizarre things that have happened on the 23rd of a month, or that there's actually a movie called, I think it might just be called 23. It's like
23, with Jim Carrey, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's just absolutely fascinating when you go down that rabbit hole, you'll find some crazy stuff.
Oh yeah.
But it was also I think the reason why the number 5 was picked to be sacred in Discordianism was, again, just sort of arbitrary and to be funny. And, it's a number that can't really be evenly divided into or whatever. So it was picked arbitrarily, but in Greek mythology, especially in the work of Hesiod, the 5th day of the month was always considered inauspicious because that was the day that Eris gave birth to her son Horcus. And so, without intending to, Greg Hill and Carrie Thornley inadvertently referenced classical Greek mythology when they picked that number as sacred to Eris.
Interesting. Well, and also with the 5, the number, you have that Pent Alpha, you have the Drutenfoot, which is the Druids used to wear the star on their sandals. You have this idea of the 5 to the 10 turning the man on his head in Capricorn. So there's a lot of symbolical elements within 5 itself that relate to us as human beings.
Yeah. The Pentagon, especially in the first edition of the Principia Discordia, there was a little kind of infographic of an upright pentagram that was labeled good, and then there was an inverted pentagram next to it that was labeled bad.
Bad,
And
right,
underneath that was the pentagram turned at a 90-degree angle that was labeled Aristesque.
There you
So
go.
it was there. The idea being that within Discordianism, there isn't really good or bad. There is just sort of existence. We're going in a different direction.
Totally. And that's kind of with any god or goddess that you look at in the ancient world. There's always that, the life giver and the storm bringer, as far as the dichotomy of the two.
Exactly. And that was one thing about Discordianism that I think really appealed to me early on, was that, within classical mythology and within all world mythology, we do see the good and the bad of the gods. We see the creative forces and we see the destructive forces. And Eris was always just sort of this kind of quasi-villainous character. Yep. So within Discordianism, she is given that creative side. And where she is lifted up and seen as more fun-loving and happy-go-lucky versus just this kind of dour little character from Greek mythology.
Right. And well, it's interesting because I came across the Principia Discordia before the internet really even happened, and I didn't know it had anything to do with Robert Anton Wilson until later, and kind of just tying all that together. And it's just been an interesting journey going down the whole chaos road.
Robert Anton Wilson really developed the idea of the word Fnord. Right. Which appeared in the Principia Discordia as just sort of a random throwaway nonsense word. But then he built a whole concept around it, where a Fnord is something put in print media specifically that makes you uncomfortable. Everyone in the world is conditioned not to be able to see the Fnords. Right. But they were put into like serious news articles and left out of advertisements. So if you were reading a newspaper, you'd get uncomfortable if you tried to read what was actually happening in the world, and instead you would be drawn to the pretty pictures in the advertisements.
Right.
And so as characters go through their initiations in the Illuminatus trilogy, there's the whole concept of I can see the Fnords, where one day they open up the paper and they see the word Fnord everywhere. Yep. And they are deconditioning. They are getting over those blocks that have been put to keep them under control.
Right. And I don't know, you get into Robert Anton Wilson in regard to him talking about his relationship, his internal relationship with the ideas of the ancient mystic Sufis, and kind of when you go down that Sufi road, you have this idea that nothing is either right or wrong, that everything it gets into kind of the ideas of like cosmic justice and kind of some of these things that are outside of the scope of what the human understanding of the dichotomy dualism of right and wrong is.
Exactly. That's so many, at least according to Discordianism, so many of those binary things are artificial constructions.
Right.
They are man-made arbitrary concepts. And like order and disorder are man-made concepts that are a fractional reflection of creation and destruction. But nothing really exists on a binary. Everything is a bimodality.
Right.
Like if we think of gender, a lot of people will say gender is man and woman, but there are things that are definitely masculine. There are things that are sort of masculine. There are things that are kind of feminine, but not really. There are things that cannot be defined. Yeah, it's all kind of a spectrum with high points on it.
Yeah.
And everything in the world really is a lot more like that than just a binary yes and no or a binary right and wrong.
Right. Everything kind of lays in a gray area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is I think tough for people to get their brain around at times.
Right.
It's a lot more comfortable to think in terms of right and wrong, but that especially with like online culture and social media, we get so caught up in the idea of right and wrong that if somebody says if somebody puts out an idea that is different than the way I would want to do it, instead of going, oh well, that's how they do it, I'm going to do things my way, the gut response is, well, you're telling me I'm wrong because you're doing it differently than me, and if you're right, that means I have to be wrong. And it's like, well, we can all kind of be right.
There's 1,000 ways to do everything.
Exactly.
There are
things that can only be done one way.
And I also find it interesting with Robert Anton Wilson in regard to as he progresses through his works. You know, you see like in the historical Illuminatus trilogy, where he's almost writing a book within a book in the footnotes. So he has these multipolar worlds kind of reflecting on one another. But then, you know, even further, he begins to create his own words that kind of bring the two sides into a singular unit. And it's just interesting, this whole kind of scope of movement that he is drawing out and kind of exposing.
Yeah, fascinating enough also is that the Discordians are using the yin and the yang symbol, which are two things that then, you know, in the Taoist culture you have, or in Taoism you have Wu, which is the all nothingness, the primordial ooze or chaos that separates into yin and yang, and from nothing to, you know, to the many. And so it's fascinating this how that kind of works to explode into the myriad of many things as then we move ourselves back up towards the all primordial chaos organizational skill. It's just a fascinating thing to think about as well when you move into the yin and the yang, which isn't right or wrong, obviously, but it has this more yang, you know, as two full yin and, you know, two nothingness. And so these are the things when they spin, right? That's the dynamism of the Tai Chi practices that you're working with, these spiral, is that when you're doing it, you're creating the all everything, the nuance within the world, so to speak.
Absolutely. The primordial chaos of Taoism is actually personified within the Principia Discordia, because in Taoism, that primordial force is called Hongmen or Hongmeng. And that name translates to, it's like basically means either primordial mist, vast obscurity, or big goose dummy. And in Taoist philosophy, Hongmeng is sort of this character who is very much a trickster, and he's this primordial chaos, but he just sort of pops up every once in a while to shake things up. And in the Principia, he is listed as one of the apostles of Eris, and he sort of represents Taoism and Eastern thought, and personifies the contributions that those philosophies bring into Discordianism.
I have somebody asking here: are double entendres a form of chaos magic?
They certainly could be.
I never thought of that.
Double and triple entendres.
Yeah.
All magicians are word cells, and all magic is words.
Yes.
That is the truth. That is from all the times that like we have spent, Nick, doing the show, like all the people I've interviewed on my show, every single magician, left-hand path, right-hand path, institutional, non-institutional, in general, they do have a writing practice in a way. And so you must admit, like, look at Austin Osman Spare, like maybe the, you know, primordial, we'll call him primordial Discordian. It's poems, it's illustrations, it's mimetic before mimetics was a thing. And so you must admit that the technology for a lot of chaos magic is the words, right? I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to say that it's absolutely true. The magician is the word spell of the aeon. So.
Yeah. I think to find out if something is an expression of chaos magic, the best way to find out is to try it out. And chaos magic is very much learned by doing. So if somebody has an idea of using double entendres in magical practice, do it, see what happens. Like chaos magic is all about the F around and find out, which is, you know, it's so many occult disciplines. There's the idea of guidelines and warnings and don't do X because X, Y and Z will happen and the pendulum will swing back upon you. And in chaos magic, it's like, well, I'm going to do it and see what happens. And if it doesn't work the way I want it to, I'll try something else. Belief very much is a tool. And if I'm going into a magical experiment, I'm not going to go into it believing that if I do this wrong, something bad is going to happen to me. That doesn't do me any good. That's a belief I can set aside for a different paradigm and focus on, I want to get results. I'm going into this as objectively as possible to see what happens and what can I do to make it work better next time.
If you can too, I mean, I know we touched on it before, but on the practical, I mean, I guess I would say all of it's kind of like hands-on with chaos magic, practical side. What would be some practical what would be techniques behind chaos magic, or to give people an idea of like what practices would a chaos magician be doing?
I think there really are, and I'd say this after just going off on nothing is binary. There are two really good places to start within chaos magic, and those are gnosis and paradigm shifting. Gnosis.
Nice. I was going to ask you about the paradigm shifting. Thank you.
Yeah. Gnosis is just basically what can be described as getting into a trance state. It's the mental state necessary to work magic. There are a lot of different ways to do it. There's excitatory methods where you dance around a whole bunch until you're kind of tranced out, and then you can make magic. There are inhibitory, meditation, quiet meditation, trying to center yourself and be calm and still and get into that state. Road hypnosis is a form of gnosis. Daydreaming is a form of gnosis. When like if you've ever back in school, if you were ever writing a paper and daydreaming, and then you look down and you're just like doodling on the page, that's a Gnostic state. So that's just something to keep in mind as we're trying to practice within a chaos magic paradigm, is getting into that kind of flow state. Paradigm shifting is basically the ability to change belief at will. There's a couple of sayings within chaos magic of belief as a tool. A phrase that pops up a lot, which specifically because of the Illuminatus trilogy, nothing is true, everything is permitted. Or as it says in the Principia Discordia, everything is true, even false things are true. So we get to kind of decide what we believe, and we can believe whatever we need to do to accomplish the work at hand. I think that sort of trips people up sometimes, because they think in terms of like, well, okay, but I'm gonna worship Greek gods, but then I'm gonna worship Norse gods, but can I worship a Greek and Norse god together? That's not really paradigm shifting. That's just sort of an eclectic approach to paganism. A paradigm shift would be, okay, I normally tend to think in sort of pantheistic terms, but for the purposes of this working, I'm going to not believe in any gods. I'm going to approach this as an atheist. Or I'm going to approach this as a henotheist. And I'm going to say that Eris is my primary goddess, and she is the one who's important to me, and I'm not going to worry about other gods, whether they exist or not. It's those isms that are the paradigm. Like how we see spirituality as a whole. And we can also see stuff that doesn't exist yet, things that haven't been believed.
Right.
I could say you kind of hit like, I guess I technically had a paradigm shift when I do think I had, I've made claims that I do think I possibly crossed the abyss or had experiences like that. And I will say after that, like you even said something about the gods. I didn't become an atheist, but I don't see those gods as actually being literal anymore.
Right.
I see them as being archetypes. I do believe in one source or God somewhere that created everything, but it's kind of interesting. I was very eclectic, was very into all these different types of gods and this and that. And then I guess I eventually had a paradigm shift where I was like, no, you're not even real.
Yeah. That is a paradigm shift. Yeah, belief is a subjective truth, right? Like throughout our lives, there are going to be periods where we believe something really hard, and then we look back and go, oh wow, I have not believed in that in years. Whether it's our values or our perception of the divine, those things kind of shift on their own organically. Paradigm shifting is doing it intentionally.
Right.
The best example that I have on hand for paradigm shifting is and this is really because I often get asked what's the difference between eclectic witchcraft and chaos witchcraft. And in eclectic witchcraft, we are assembling a practice around our beliefs. Like we have an idea of what witchcraft is and maybe what gods we want to venerate, and we're going to figure out how to do that. Within chaos witchcraft, we are assembling beliefs around our practice. And the best example I've been able to think of so far is there is an old Irish folk charm that comes from a book called Irish Charms, Mystic Cures, and Superstitions by Lady Jane Wilde, Oscar Wilde's mom. She was a folklorist. And so she had collected this spell on how to become invisible. And it was, you get the heart of a raven and you cut it open and you put 3 black beans in it. And then you bury the heart, and then the bean tree grows. And then you take one of the beans and place it under your mouth, and you like recite an invocation to Satan, and then you can become invisible.
Oh, jeez.
And so if I'm going to go through it, right, like let's say I've decided to try this spell and I just happen to have a raven's heart lying around, because of course I do. And you have to have a black handled knife as well. The color black is very important. It all ties in because it's an invisibility spell. So black bird, black knife, black bean. I happen to have a raven's heart. I've got some black beans. I'm down to do this. And then I get to the invocation to Satan. If I'm coming at it from an eclectic point of view, I'm going to go, well, Satan really isn't part of my pagan beliefs. So I'm going to start thinking about what gods or goddesses might relate to invisibility, and what gods and goddesses might relate to vegetation, because this is something growing. And is there a connection there? Well, Hades is sort of about invisibility, and he had that magic helmet that made him invisible, and his wife is Persephone, and she's the goddess of vegetation. So I can rewrite the invocation to Hades and Persephone, and it'll probably work because like I'm doing everything else correctly. So it would just be easier to worship Satan for 5 seconds. And that's like, I'm going to do my little invocation to Satan. I'm going to pop the bean in my mouth. If I turn invisible, noted. If I don't turn invisible, then maybe I'll try it with pagan gods and see what happens.
I love it.
And that's for me, that's the big difference. That's really assembling the belief around the practice.
Yeah. All right. Did any of you guys have any more questions on maybe on the paradigm shift? I want to jump over to sigils. So in case anybody had something on that or any other questions.
Do you think that you need an actual paradigm to be able to make it a shift?
That's a good question. And I think the term paradigm is fairly broad. I think actually I'm going to go back to the Principia, because within the Principia Discordia, culture is defined as a group of people who are looking at the world through a particular grid. Each culture has their own grid. And if we don't necessarily have a belief system to shift into or out of, we can still shift our perception. We can still look at things the way someone else might look at it, and that would still count as a shift.
Well, and Robert Anton Wilson, he specifically talks about this in regard to the mind tunnels. As far as
reality tunnels.
Reality tunnels, yeah. So...
And he's using that based off of ideals of what phenomenology is trying to teach us, is that we actually don't ever view or can see the thing in itself, the noumena, or the objective truth. All we are ever truly seeing is our perception of the perceived object itself. And it is through that we can understand that we are viewing all of reality through different models of experience. And he was deeply influenced by a guy by the name of Alfred Korzynski, who was a general semanticist. And his whole work was understanding that we use language as a metaphor, right? Or an understanding of how we use abstractions. And so we're trying to always talk about the concrete reality, the objective truth, but in doing so, our language is adding different levels of abstractions, and he has it as a pyramidal structure going all the way up to the general abstraction of whatever truth or freedom or these things are, but it's reports of reports. And through our changing of paradigm, we change our understanding of the actual concrete truth in and of itself, which is there, because without that, we can't have or talk about anything. So that's
right. That's very Platonic in nature.
Very Platonic. I'm a Platonist, so there's that.
Yeah.
I randomly have an anecdote that ties into what you're saying about perception.
Nice.
We've been talking about Robert Anton Wilson and the Illuminatus trilogy. It was turned into a 9-hour stage play, directed by, and productions of it happened, and it was directed by a guy named Ken Campbell. And one night during a performance backstage, he and his wife conceived a daughter, and her name was Daisy. Daisy Eris Campbell was her full name. They named her after Eris, and she grew up to be sort of a free spirit and a performer and a libertine. And one day, her family got together and said, "Hey, Daisy, we need to go file a police report, and you're the only reliable witness we have. Will you come with us?" And she said, "Oh, okay, sure." And they get in the car, and it turns out they were like, "Surprise, we're not going to go give a statement. We're having you institutionalized. We just needed to get you in the car." And she threw a fit, and she was like, I am not insane. I do not need to be institutionalized. All I need right now is a copy of Soap Opera Digest." And she threw this huge fit about Soap Opera Digest, so big that they pulled over, and she stormed into a convenience store and bought a copy of Soap Opera Digest. And she tore it open, and the article she turned to, the headline was, "Daisy Goes Crazy."
Oh.
And so she closed the magazine, and she got back in the car, and she said, "I'd like to be institutionalized now, please."
Synchronicities.
Yeah. And that is my favorite Discordian story of all time.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So sigils.
Yes.
Is that a big part of your chaos magic?
The way I do them is differently than a lot of people do them. I think sigils, the modern concept of sigils is really comes from Austin Osman Spare's work, filtered through an early chaos magician named Ray Sherwin, and has now within modern occult spaces been very crystallized. Like, you write out your intent and you cross out the letters and you put the letters into a pattern and you create a sigil. And a lot of people think that is how you make sigils. That is one way of making sigils. The way I make them, and I talk about this in the book, is almost sort of automatic writing, where I sort of get a story going in my head of what I want to see happen, of the reality that I want to perceive, or that I want to experience. And then I just sort of, without looking at the paper, just let my hand kind of holding the pen do whatever it wants. And when the story comes to a close in my head, then I have my sigil that I can do whatever I want with. I do think sigils are very efficient. They are a good way of kind of getting into that Gnostic state, especially in the inhibitory way of, whether it's, just drawing a doodle, or whether it's breaking down letters and rearranging them to create a shape. All of those help us get into that Gnostic state. And then I think they're very convenient. I think they're very efficient. But I will die on the hill of there is an infinite variety of ways to make them.
Don't you think that there are better ways than other ways, though, or not?
I think there are. I think the right way to make sigils is always going to be individual, because the way I make sigils may not work for somebody else. A friend of mine made amazing sigils using the kind of standard write the letters out. That worked so well for her. That never worked quite as well for me. The doodling method gets me great results. I think that when it comes to just witchcraft or magic in general, I don't think there's ever a right or wrong. I do think there's inefficient. And with sigils, if we get it in our heads that there's only this very specific way to do it, and we have to do it that way, whether it works for us or not, that's inefficient. Finding a better way for us individually is always going to work better.
Yeah, and I think as an artist, when you're in the creation process of manufacturing whatever your perceived reality is, that if you break it down to a formulae or make it formulaic, it kind of loses some of the spontaneity and the natural energy of creativity. So I think that variety of possibilities leaves kind of the embers to glow a little brighter.
Right. I don't think having a framework is ever a bad idea. I've got a system that I know works for me, so I'm going to stick within that framework because I know I get results. But I'm never going to be afraid to experiment within that framework.
Right.
And that's how our practices can get very very specialized but very uniquely tailored to us, where they may not work for anybody else, but if I'm getting results, I'm not going to worry about that.
Right, and with any art form, any craft, you're essentially learning your tools, and then you learn the nuanceful elements of how to, slightly manipulate them to get more exact, servitude out of them.
Oh, sorry. You were getting bad feedback, so I had to mute you for a second. Sorry.
I fully agree with what you said.
Oh yes. Now you have some other things in here that I found kind of interesting. You got moon water and you got classic practices: moon water, cord cutting, and anointing. What does chaos and Discordian framing add to these basics?
So with moon water specifically, moon water is something that for some reason gets under my skin and I think the moon water craze seems to have died down in online spaces, but for a while, if hey witches, who's making moon water tonight?
Yeah.
And it's like, you're putting water in a jar, and the moon controls the tides. Water is all, we don't have to make the water more moonish, right? Like that used to just make me crazy. But people were also really stressing out about it. Like, did I make my moon water correctly? Like, how do you make moon water incorrectly? So I wanted to give some ideas of variations of just putting water on your windowsill at night, and getting into the idea of willow water and of soaking willow twigs in water, because the main ingredient, which is an old health tonic, and is farmers will pour willow water into the roots of plants, and the willow is a tree that's sort of ruled by the moon, but it's the ingredients in willow that make it useful as like a topical anesthetic,
right?
Are processed to make aspirin.
Yes.
So I was like, if you really want useful moon water, my whole thing was get an aspirin. It's a little tiny moon, and if you've got a tiny little pen, you can carve a tiny little sigil on your aspirin and dissolve that in water. You have just made willow water, which is a traditional lunar water.
Yeah.
I wanted people to think outside the box in that respect, and not get so caught up in the idea of right and wrong over something so simple as putting water in a jar on your window.
And interestingly, as far as the whole willow thing, within the Talmud, they talk about not planting a willow tree next to a well, because the roots will go into the well, and by drinking that water on a regular basis, it'll actually pull the energy out of you.
That makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. Especially because of that numbing quality of the willow. But so that's with the moon water, that was kind of my take on it, of we don't have to get stressed out about this, and we can do it we can find other efficient ways to do it. With cord cutting, people, that's another thing where people get really caught up in the cord cutting spells and the elaborate tying the piece of thread to the two candles, and you light the two candles, and then you watch the cord burn, and it's a terrible fire hazard, but it's also not ancient traditional witchcraft. The way people are doing it now comes from The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, season 3, I think, where Sabrina does this spell, and it got pop culture has always had an impact on the occult,
for sure.
And so after that episode came out, suddenly all these people were casting cord cutting spells, and within a couple of years, people did not realize where it had come from, and were stressing out about it, because the way people were doing it with the two candles and the thread is more divinatory than anything else. How are these two people connected? Which one is having more influence over the other? Is this a healthy relationship? Is this did I just burn my house down? There's a lot of questions to be answered with that. So my take on cord cutting was, light the candle. If you want to do the cords, that's great. Cut the cord yourself. Get scissors. You impose your will on the situation. Don't leave it up to chance. And then I followed it up with, and don't post the results on the internet, because if you're cutting cords with somebody, you don't need to get on Instagram to tell everybody you're doing it, because you have just reinforced the cords. I was like, I like randomly when I was writing that particular segment, I kind of like went off on this whole thing about block your exes. Like I was just like you've got, if you're going to do this spell to cut people out, you have to cut them out too. You have to do the work in the real world to bolster, cutting the string between two candles.
Yeah, I think that's actually that very ending is a really important point. One that Lon Milo Duquette talks about in a lot of his conversations with his things is that when you do said spells or rituals or anything in that magical realm, say, for instance, even though to me it sounds kind of ridiculous, but like you want to find a new girlfriend that's going to resonate with you, or a new boyfriend or a new partner or whatever it is that that people do if you want to find love, right? And what he states is, yes, do your ritual, do your magic, do your thing, but realize that you're not actually doing it to manifest a person out there in the world. What you're doing it is to vibrate your nervous system to change you alchemically so you can magnetize and rise to the frequency of the individual that's already out there in the world. So you can then, it like rearranges the discord, the chaos of the universe into a chance happenstance that all of a sudden you can become the person that you're trying to attract, right? And I think that's kind of similar to something that you were stating at the very end, which I think is very important, and also grounds the whole work in understanding that you're not actually manipulating like other people, which I think is something that is awful to do. You want to make sure you're only ever manipulating your own nervous system. And this goes back to Robert Anton Wilson talking about where one of his people was Timothy Leary. And even though Timothy Leary in the conspiracy world, they want to throw a lot of shade on him, if they were to read his work, like the 8 circuits of consciousness, the what they would understand is that he had 2 laws. And the first one was, one of them was don't change without their knowing anybody else's consciousness, which I think is really important, especially because he was doing work on LSD for Harvard at that time. You know what I mean? And so it's like I think it's an important talk when it comes to chaos magic in and of itself, because it gets a little chaotic.
I'm actually going to follow you up, Brandon, but not correct you this time, because I actually agree with you. I think that I think the idea of a causality in magic is actually really important. And I think that people should actually consider, I know that you said, Thumper, about like imposing your will for cord cutting, and I'm not against that. But I also think, like, how much do you want to implicate yourself? We have an Eris figure in I'm a Vajrayana Buddhist. So for me, we have an Eris figure in Dharma. Her name is Ekajati. I've spoken about her many times on the show and on my show. And, she's the goddess of Mamos, which is the Tibetan word for chaos. So they're very similar. I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but they have an overlap, we'll say. And so I like to look at, if for my own practices, I try and be acausal. Now I understand, like I am a sorcerer also, so I get that it's never going to be 100% perfect, and I recognize and accept that, but I try. And I think that it is about view, like that's how we would say it in like a Buddhist sorcery way. It's about like how you view it. Do you cultivate bodhicitta? Do you like do all these preliminary things? That would be a way to make like your sorcery acausal. So I do think what Brandon is saying is important, because I think that people should not want to implicate their karma so deeply in an whether you agree with my framing, not you, Thumper, but just anyone listening broadly, if they agree with my Aeon of the Daughter framework or not, or they still think we're in Kali Yuga, which the Tantras say we're not, so I don't think we are. So I'm saying that, do you want to be stuck in the degraded Aeon? I personally don't. I want to move forward with the Aeon. That's just me. So I think that this idea of like acausality and looking to lighten your karmic load, maybe you could say, is actually important to think about. Just think about, just as an idea.
Yeah, nice, Jin.
Thank you, Jin.
I can be good too,
Wait, what
I
I'm
know
not
you
just
can.
left-hand path and evil.
I know you can. I know it. I see within your eyes that I've never truly saw.
I do like the idea of acausality, and I do think one thing that trips up a lot of modern practitioners is kind of fear of consequence. And if I do something, people are, and it's where people get caught up in either today people get caught up in like bashing the idea of the threefold law, and that's Wiccan and that's silly. And then somebody will mention a love spell and they'll be like, oh no, if you cast a love spell, that will rebound back upon you somewhere between 2 and 4 times, right? Like they're still caught up in that idea of the consequence, but all actions have consequence. Consequence is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like if I write a glowing 5-star review for a friend's book and that results in the book selling better, that's a good consequence, right? Like it's like it's still my actions. It's just the consequence worked out well for everyone. Consequences don't have to be negative, and we don't have to always be worried about how much damage are we doing. We can also just kind of think in terms of how can I make things work out for not only myself but for the people around me. How can I do things where I'm causing the least amount of collateral damage while still getting the results I want.
Yeah, and I think it's something to think about also with how important, especially in the magical world, but not even that, just everyday life. There is a real dichotomy between harmony and dissonance, and we hear it in music, and it is two opposite poles of, that's why sacred geometry works. That's why the music of the spheres was talked about with the Pythagorean cults and how we could create music itself. You kind of, these things, and so it's like, that would be something to think about when we're trying to understand, well, it's the least possible consequence. But at the same time, it's like, can we also try to make it so consequence is harmonious with things? Because when it's dissonant, that's when karma, we could say, is produced, because we're kind of going against the flow. Or in Crowley's words of the AA, it's that every man and every woman is a star. And so when he's talking about that, what that means is that we are all in the universe as stars, moving perfectly with the harmony of the spheres. And it's when my interpretation is that when we move through the world in a dissonant state, that's when all of a sudden stars collide. And we could use moral ambiguous terms, which I think is really important. But because this is like, well, that just happens in the universe. Well, it's like, well, then look, can we also understand that has its own levels of chaotic, dissonant reflections through the cause-effect making machine of the universe? These things I ponder continuously.
I like it. Sorry, I have to read. Did anybody else have any more questions for Thumper before I keep going? Nothing. All right. What matters to, I guess, you over time? Results or revelations?
Both are still important because I still like getting results. But revelation and understanding has become, the older I get, the more important that gets. I think 15 years ago, if you had asked me that, I would say I don't have to understand something for it to work. And I would be more caught up in the work itself. Today, what I find so fascinating, especially about the occult, is like learning more about the history and the connections and where ideas came from and how new ideas connect to old ideas. And one of the biggest, I think I mentioned this in the book towards the end, but as an example, several years ago, I was introduced to lysomantic divination with stones. And it was sort of pitched to me as like, this is like ancient witchcraft. This is, the ancient seers of Greece and Rome would cast the pebbles and see the future. And I started looking into it and I started experimenting with it, and it worked really well for me. And the more I dug and dug and dug, because I was like, but I want to find the source of this. Like, what documents do we have that ancient Greeks and Romans were casting the pebbles? And I was able to trace the history of modern lithomancy all the way back to 1978. And a book called Witchcraft for Tomorrow by Doreen Valiente, where she has a section on lithomancy. And the practice of lithomancy continued, but nobody remembered to write down where they found it. So today, when you pick up a book on lithomancy, it is the origins of lithomantic divination are shrouded in history. And no, they're not. They're shrouded in 1978. But on the one hand, I get results from them, so it doesn't matter that they come from the 70s instead of, antiquity. But I also find it so fascinating that they came from 1978. And that this one witch in England figured this out on her own and created a system that could be replicated. And that history is more interesting to me than if it had been, well, this is how an ancient Greek was doing it. Like the learning process of it, of wow, this witch in the 70s just invented this. That's amazing. That revelation is cooler to me than anything else.
I want to respond to that really quick because I find that really interesting. Also, that you said it from 1978, simply because this is true for a lot of modern magic. It does seem to be true for a lot of modern magic. It seems to be a lot of recreation. Like not just from the the new age like 1970. I'm not putting it down because some of that stuff does work, and I think that it's very prescient that you say that you can get results from it because you can, because it is based on older ideas, but we don't even know what those ideas are, which is sometimes my issue with some of the institutional formations of magic, is that they will pretend. I call it the great we was kings LARP. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I thought it is what I call it. They tend to project themselves into the antiquity or even to the medieval period, and the reality is like past the 1300s, we don't know what the fuck they were practicing, just to speak really plainly. And so it's really difficult to then be like, okay, this is what we're going to do in 2026, just like these quote unquote ancient we was kings. Well, we can't do that. So we have to actually use what is pragmatic, what actually works. And if it comes from a Doreen Valenti book, so be it. What's the big deal?
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a thing that constantly is perennial, and I think you said that really well.
And I agree with you. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Jen, I agree with you. Just the fact that it's what matters within the timescape of where we are. I think the inherent human ability is like hidden within all of us, and it's just a matter of each individual finding these necessary tools to be able to draw out, and make these things workable.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I like what everybody's saying, because there is something definitely beautiful about the idea that everything stems from the human nervous system, body, mind, syzygy. So it's like, of course, we're going to be able to tap into these things if we have the right passion, madness, and different things like that. But what's really important, I think, also why it's like not all things are magic. I believe in magic in all things, but not all things are magic. And so it seems to be a contradiction, but it's not, because if you want to hammer a nail, it's the best thing to use is a hammer. You can use your shoe, it just might take longer. And so there's something really interesting with that. It's like there are structural systems that can be used by individual practitioners, and we may not know exactly how that came through time. But what I'm coming to understand more is that if we can use the term philosophy, right? The philosophia, this thing where you can learn how to critically think, how to analyze, and how to break things down in a structural, that love of wisdom, break it down in a way, then we can actually. So that's how magic works, right? Is that you have a science and art of causing change with your will, even though it's like a massively hated definition, especially by those who have stemmed them through the different institutions and organizations like the Golden Dawn, these things like that. They want to go away from things like that. But it's like, if we can find the science of it, and and I don't mean this functional mechanistic science, but that philosophia, that love of wisdom, that ability to put yourself into a state of ecstasy. That's why another Crowley book or thing that he wrote was the enthusiastic ecstasy, right? That's done. Yeah, exactly. That's done through either your divine dance or the harmony of the spheres for the Apollo. That's how you can break it into the Apollonian, the Dionysian. But there is something that you can do to gain the best results, and it's not everything. So it's like it's a fine line, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah. Go ahead.
See, I'm sorry. I said that was one thing that for me was very refreshing about both Discordianism and chaos magic, is that neither system makes any bones about being ancient. And chaos magic was the pioneers of chaos magic were taking structural systems and reworking them to try to make them more efficient. Discordianism took this one myth from Greek mythology and built something entirely new out of it. And they were very open about that. And, throughout the history of occultism, I think it really started picking up steam with the rise of theosophy, but even pre-theosophy, the guy in the late 1700s who started using tarot cards for divination didn't say, hey, guys, look what I can do. He said, oh, this comes to us from ancient Egypt. And it was like, no.
That was
an Anglican priest in 1799. The Key of Solomon was not written Solomon, right? It took the 1500s, but not much further back than that. But even back then, there was this idea, but this is ancient, which means it's real and valid. And it doesn't have to be. Right.
I was going to say the Bohemian Tarot that is by Pappas. It claims to be the most ancient book in the world on, so you can but this is something you consistently see and it's like the Templars, later on claiming lineage, or the Rosicrucians even claiming lineage, and it just it's this power multiplier. It's a way to excite the nervous system in a way that you're participating with something that echoes back into the dawn of, human thinking and the mind and who we are as a species.
Nice.
Yeah. And theosophy really introduced that utopian idea that before all this modern stuff was going on, humankind was living in this utopian idea, and that's where. And so I think a lot of modern occultists, without realizing it, are still thinking in terms of ancient utopia. When if we transported them back to that time, very quickly they'd be like, "This is not a utopia. This is not a this is right." But we do have that sort of idealism about occultism a lot of times, and that it needs to be old in order to be valid. One thing I hear a lot about in social media when people are complaining about Wicca, it's new, but witchcraft is old. And I'm like, well, all your witchcraft is coming from the same sources that Wicca did. You're promoting this ancient witch cult idea that you are also saying has been discredited, and yet you are still wanting us to believe it.
Yeah, and that's actually exactly what Frances Dame Yates wrote about in her Hermetic traditions with Giordano Bruno, is that there's this great argument that Thoth Hermes, the thrice great, was this ancient, and Hermeticism is this ancient thing from 1000, 2000 BC, when really it actually was the syncretic integration of Platonism, Neoplatonism, Stoicism, and their philosophies had actually reached a point where they were like, we don't know what else to do. And then all of a sudden they integrate all these ritual and the different things, and all of a sudden they come up with Hermeticism. Even though, integrating the Gnostic texts as well and the Emerald tablets that were, before them. But it's it's the exact same thing of like, Hermes, the thrice, that whole thing.
Yeah, and interestingly with Hermes, from Tahuti to Thoth to Hermes to Mercury, it's always been kind of related to the idea of it's the conscious brain of society as a whole, and all of these scientific works are kind of the process of humanity kind of bringing forth these ideas as the mind of the divine.
Nice. And I do want the audience to know there is such thing as the Thoth cult. There is such thing as the Hermes cult. There was and there are the theurgia, right? The divine workings of ancient Egyptian and the Orphic mysteries and the Pythagorean mysteries that stem through, and you can see it written in Plato's works. And so it's not that those things weren't happening. It's that the Hermetic tradition isn't thousands of years old. but it's a syncretized understanding of those things, similar to what you're talking about, Thumper, with witchcraft and Wiccanism.
Yeah.
It's that amalgamation of things, and now we have a new label for it. So for the modern thinker to think then it's ancient.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And modern witchcraft, I'm far too old to be on TikTok, but they let me on anyway. And but that's one thing that I put a lot of effort into pointing out the origins of current witchcraft trends and ideas, because a lot of what people present as traditional witchcraft is an amalgamation of Wicca, chaos magic, and hoodoo. Because in the late 2000s, there was this big online thing where the movie The Skeleton Key came out in 2006. A bunch of pagans Googled hoodoo, found an online correspondence course, appropriated a whole bunch of it. Again, did not write down their sources. So 10 years later, everybody was like, this is ancient traditional witchcraft. And I'm like, that's a sour jar from 1939. That is not ancient traditional witchcraft. That is African-American folk magic.
Right.
White people set it down. Right. But people don't know the history, and there's sort of this collective amnesia around it at times, where it's changing and evolving, which is great, but it would help to know where it comes from, so we're not always claiming that it is 10,000 years old.
I want to respond to that as like someone who has, well, like Nick and I have done shows on like different Afro-syncretic traditions. Obeah, we did a long form series on that, and I'm forgetting his name now, but the Lawrence Company published from Chicago. So I'm quite familiar with the hoodoo sort of methodology and like the history. I think that's a really great point you brought up, how there was an infusion, especially in that, like the Catherine Ironwood, like all her books, and her book is really good. Like her book, I'm not saying it's like better than any herb book in 2026, but I was saying that I would personally still, I still own it, and I still think it's one of my best herb books. So I'm just saying, like, if you want like some real shit, it's good. And I also think that what you're saying about how it's infused into like more New Age / neo-paganism as it is, I think it was even before. I think it was like the Herman Slater, like the kind of like the oil making, that kind of like New York chaos magic, left hand path, like OTO crowd. I think that they were also like very much informed by like the kind of like card readers of the Bronx and the botanica culture of like I guess that's not Brooklyn, but like Harlem and like all of those kinds of things. Like I think that magic, and I've said this so many times, so I apologize, but you know, magic works better together because gnosis and knowledge work better together, because only in synthesis can you actually understand the contour of the truth. Right. So like what actually works. That's what I think. I don't know.
Oh, hold on a second, Thumper. I had you muted again because your background. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry about the background noise, but no, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that with especially when you mentioned Herman Slater, right? He was the owner of what was originally called the Warlock Shop and then eventually became Magical Child, this kind of iconic occult shop in New York. And he was putting out, he had a publishing arm and was putting out books on how to make magical oils that was very influenced by by the folk magic of marginalized groups who were also shopping at Magical Child. Same thing with, there's a store in my area that the first time I went there, I was expecting kind of a New Age bookstore, and I walked into what appeared to be a yerberia. And I was like, this feels a little weird and appropriative. Why are we, keeping all the neat high-end New Age astrology books next to all the Afro-Caribbean religious products? And I just mentioned something in passing to the owner, and she was like, oh, well, we have all these customers coming in who practice these religions, and they don't want to have to drive all the way across town to the Mojo store on the other side of downtown, so they asked me to start carrying it. So, I think something very similar happened in New York, where Slater was carrying products and manufacturing products for a specific customer base, which in itself is kind of syncretic. What happened with Lucky Mojo was that when the pagan community discovered this online hoodoo resource, there was an idea at the time that anything magical was pagan. that Christians could not practice magic, that you couldn't be Christian and believe in magic. So these pagans were sort of flooding into these online spaces that were designed for hoodoo and for African American root work, and were asking things like, well, how do you reconcile this Christianity with your pagan beliefs? And the root workers were like, well, we're not pagan. And the pagans got this idea of like, we must save the magic from the Christians, right? And they also didn't really want to follow rules, and they didn't want to be, we're witches. Nobody tells us what to do. So they were, like signing up for the Lucky Mojo course, getting the textbook and plagiarizing it, or getting the textbook, bailing from the course, and setting up a website announcing themselves as a spiritual worker. And I was like, funny, last week you were a high priestess of Inanna, and now you're a spiritual worker. Interesting. But that's where, today we hear a lot about cultural appropriation, and the pagans are very, strong feelings about cultural appropriation, but they don't really know what it is, and they choose not to remember actual appropriation happening in real time. I may have gone on a little bit there, and I do apologize for that, because I have strong feelings about it.
I think this is an interesting question. Sorry, guys. But I do think that what you're raising, Thumper, is an interesting question. Like, what is cultural appropriation as it relates to magic? Like, for me personally, I'm mixed. I've grown, everybody knows I've grown up, I grew up in Asia and Canada and the US, all three, throughout my entire life. And I'm biracial myself. So, for me, I don't personally believe in cultural appropriation as long as people are approaching the system with just a general respect, as you should with all magical things, and you're not taking them outside of the context of which they are understood. So I'm totally okay with people using different, obviously that's very chaos magic, like using very like utilizing the different methods. Like a honey jar is a great wealth draw. It's a great wealth tool that it shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, you can't use High John because you're not from this thing. No, I mean, I think that you can. I just think that you should actually know the story, like understand like Brer Rabbit and the whole mythologies behind it, both Native and African American. I think that that's a really important, like the lore building. People forget about that. And I think that's also what you're referring to when you're talking about like the cultural amnesia. People have forgotten the lore, but the lore is at least, well, we'll say 1/10. We'll say one magic number, 1/10 of like all kind of like like the way that you build your own paradigm. If you want to use a really chaos magic kind of framework, you need the lore. Like you want to use 40K, like the Slaanesh and instead of Eris and like all those like little dudes. Like Eldars and all that, that's fine, but you still have to know the lore, and you have to understand how like the classes and the systems and the little the machine guns work properly, because it won't really make sense. It's not it has to have an internal coherent logic. So I really, but I think it's important to have the discussion because it does come up a lot, like what is cultural appropriation in magic? And like for me, I just think if someone wants to pray to Green Tara, that's fine. That's great. I think that's amazing. Like, because I think it actually will start to transform their minds, even if they don't think it will. I think it will actually bring them closer to Dharma. But that's obviously a very Dharmic way to think. That's not a very pagan necessarily way to think. But I think that we have to have flexibility, and especially because everything is so online. Like there's so much information. Like you can look up so much hoodoo root work stuff. You can look up. You can go read Zora Neale Hurston. I mean, her book's really good if you are just wanting to learn like hoodoo candle magic and like basic saint magic from like the Bahamas or from Jamaica and how they were actually working. And it's very basic. I don't mean basic in like a bad way. I mean basic as in like their color correspondences are very different than the ones that people normally use. Their saint correspondences are different, but it's simple. It's like it's householder. It's everyone can actually access the technologies needed to do it. So I think that it's a great system especially for American magicians, since they're here on the land that is like America. Like, why not tap into that like greater knowledge of root work? That's just my opinion. But you can definitely, Thumper, you can feel free to disagree or anything you want to say.
I 100% agree, especially when you said context, because when it comes to cultural appropriation, context is key. The way I define cultural appropriation is, first of all, it's not really something one person does by themselves. unless you're going to them. But for the most part, it is something that is cultural, that is a group is doing. So I define it as cultural appropriation occurs when a dominant group adopts the traditions or fashions or music or magical practices of a marginalized group, takes those things out of context, and then either prevents the marginalized group from having access to those things, condemns the marginalized group for continuing to practice those things, or pretends that the marginalized or that those things did not originate within the marginalized group. So it's a complete. It has to do with the removing the context. When in regards to paganism and hoodoo, folk magic in general and witchcraft and these things, always have fuzzy edges. Things are going to drift in from from one regional folk magic practice to another. Like Four Thieves vinegar pops up in folk magic across the U.S. and it's an old Renaissance Italian health tonic that's used in magic in the U.S. today. But it's like something like a sour jar is a really good idea, or what people talk about return to sender spells right now. Those are things that originated within the magical practices of marginalized groups. So when somebody says, this road opener spell is ancient traditional witchcraft, no, it's not. That's not where it came from. It did not come from Europe. The witches, the old European witches, were not casting their road opener spells and their return to sender spells. Those are things that came out of the folk magic of marginalized groups, but we are pretending that it's ancient traditional witchcraft. That is appropriative. The fact that all these pagans swooped in and started incorporating hoodoo into their practices, but taking it out of the context of African American folk magic, disregarding the lore behind it, and just rebranding it as witchcraft is appropriative. And it wasn't just one person doing it. It was one community descending into another community and taking everything they could. That's where it gets offensive. One person, like if I were to go pick up a book on hoodoo and flip through it and be like, oh, hey, a freezer spell, I want to give that a shot. That's not appropriate, right? That's just me trying something in my kitchen. But if I were to make a TikTok video and say, today we're going to talk about the ancient traditional European witchcraft of freezer spells, I've taken the freezer spell out of its context and I'm claiming ownership of it and I'm disregarding where it came from. And the big thing with the kids today, with their blue hair and their pronouns, I'm choosing Gen X for my own good, is, they think of Wicca as cultural appropriation. They don't know why Wicca is cultural appropriation. They have just decided that Wicca is the source of the cultural appropriation. Because that way, especially since so many occult practitioners in online spaces are of European descent, it's a way of absolving themselves of anything. Wiccans appropriate. I'm not Wiccan, so I'm not capable of doing that. And by doing that, they are ignoring their own appropriative behaviors and inclinations. And they're not realizing that it's not a Wicca problem, it is a white people problem. Again, with the rants. I sometimes speak calmly about things too. Well, it's roll the dice. See what side of me you got.
Judith, is there something you want to say?
Yeah, there's a lot that was touched on that I'm like really surprised. And I guess it's because I don't go to those circles. And I do have a pagan background, Wiccan background. So I'm kind of surprised that maybe it's the newer, what they call the baby witches, go into these spaces, because you mentioned earlier that you are initiated into, I want to say Alexandrian or Gardnerian. Gardnerian. I'm sorry, I always mix the two up. I do apologize. But within Wicca and paganism, you do have that you go through initiations too, and you have to keep your oaths. So I'm trying to figure out, why do they think it's okay? Because a lot of those Caribbean religions are also initiatory, and they also have their secrets to just dive in there, and they're not as nice as the Wiccan community. I'm just going to say it that way, and just grab the stuff and say it's ours. there's and there's a lot of habits I guess I haven't been around to see because I've been doing my own work that very irresponsible. Very irresponsible. So is that what they're misunderstanding is chaos magic? Are they misinterpreting that as chaos magic? Because the techniques you were describing throughout this whole discussion, I'm like, oh, as a ceremonial magician, I used to try these techniques. So they were familiar to me. So I'm like, where's the chaos part? But if that's what they're calling chaos magic, that's all I have to say.
So within online spaces, especially online occult spaces, terms get trendy, ideas get trendy, and people have a tendency of adopting those terms without understanding where they come from. So the idea of chaos magic got popular for a while, and people were like, oh, I like that. But they didn't have the context. So they just thought chaos meant sort of sloppy and undisciplined and crazy and like fly by the seat of your pants. With Wicca, in the late 90s, by the late 90s, Wicca was starting to get very trendy. Most modern paganism within the US sort of like, this witchcraft came over from England to New York. The term Wicca started coming into use. The modern pagan community kind of grew out of the Wiccan community and developed its own thing. Wicca itself tended to evolve, where there's Gardnerian and Alexandrian, but non-initiatory Wicca became a thing. Eclectic Wicca became a thing. And by the 90s, this idea of Wicca was very trendy. The New Age industry kind of jumped on it and started calling a kind of a whole lot of stuff that wasn't really Wiccan, Wiccan. Or just sort of kind of just processing Wicca along with an amalgamation of a whole bunch of different ideas, usually Eastern ideas, and Hinduism, and sort of using Wicca as like the typeface on the packaging, for lack of a better way of saying it. So younger occultists today who don't know the history of Wicca and don't realize that there were generations of Wiccans before the New Age Wicca of the early 2000s, see that and they think that's all Wicca is. And they pick up a book on Wicca, and I'm paraphrasing a lot of things here, but they pick up a book on Wicca, they open it up, they see the mention of white sage, and they go, this is cultural appropriation. And because white sage is a closed practice. White sage is a plant. The religious use of white sage is part of a closed community. But there's this idea that, that's appropriation. Wicca is just appropriation. But because they don't know the history of their practices, they don't realize that a lot of their own practices are rooted in Wicca. And that, that the modern pagan movement is the holidays and the wheel of the year and the ritual practices and the 4 elements and the ritual knife and blessed be, all of that came from Wicca. And they don't realize it. So they are still practicing Wicca today while condemning Wicca for being something that they refuse to identify as. It's a strange space. I was not online for about 2 years. I was doing other stuff, and I left online spaces when everybody was like, "We're Wiccan," and we came back on, and everybody was condemning Wicca, and I was like, "What did I miss?"
I remember like around 2015, I kind of got like into social media, I guess. Well, I thought about it as an outlet for meeting or learning new stuff, and something that I had noticed. Like, I guess kind of with the chaos magic. First off, I'm just going to keep it real. A lot of the younger crowd just seemed to have kind of screwed that up. And then, but also, and I think because it just seemed to resonate one with the other, I also noticed a lot of people then gravitating towards I'm going to be into Thelema because I could do what that will, fuck that off just as much as I'm fucking off the idea of chaos magic. And it all basically comes down to I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want when I want. You know what I'm saying? And it's just I did notice even a lot of that even happening with the misunderstanding of both. It's somehow it's amazing how I just noticed a lot of them kind of come together. Or a lot of chaos magicians would have a Thelemic edge to them. I just started seeing this was a thing, at one point, and I just wonder if it seemed like a very much of just a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Oh,
There are trends within occult spaces just like there are anywhere else. And there is the chaos, the trend of chaos witchcraft or chaos magic tends to be evening out a little bit. I think the reason why there was such a sudden interest in it, again, has to do with pop culture, because by the mid 80s in England, people were writing about the death of chaos magic. That this is all coming to an end. Like the paradigm is over. And then suddenly in the mid to late 2000s, people have this renewed interest. And it has to do with Marvel Comics, because the character of the Scarlet Witch, who's this, kind of core Avenger, her power set was redefined, and somebody at Marvel picked up the term chaos magic. So the term chaos magic started getting into everybody's head again. And then the Scarlet Witch was incorporated into the cinematic universe. There was the WandaVision limited series, there was the series, and there's this idea of witches practicing chaos magic. And suddenly in online spaces, you see all these kids going, I'm a chaos witch. And they don't know about the history of chaos magic. They don't understand the idea of principle or discipline or all these things that are kind of inherent to chaos magic. They just know the term and it resonates with them, but they don't realize how it got into their heads in the first place. And it's not a bad thing that it came from pop culture, but it's like it should be acknowledged.
Mm. I think also you have the as far as the underbelly of the subculture, and William Burroughs kind of being a big promoter of chaos magic with his cut up method and a lot of the stuff that he writes about in the the Red City, the Knights of the Red City series he wrote there at the end,
Yeah, that, and I mean, I think I feel like I talk about it all the time, but Grant Morrison and the Invisibles he just like exploded chaos magic all over everyone's face, if you know what I'm saying. And it's like, that is one of the main reasons he even using certain aesthetic disciplines to make sure his comic book series even was able to continue. Were very, it's very chaos magic. I find it fascinating to think that chaos magic itself seems to be quite appropriating. You know what I mean? Like, it's basically having the ability to take from all these places, put it together, and then be all like, I don't like structure and I don't like any of these things, and yet I'm going to take all these structural practices and put it in a freaking boiling pot and call it magic. And I'm not hating, but I'm just saying it's a fascinating thing with our culture this day.
Invisibles is a really good example of what he coined the term hyper sigil, which is a sigil that moves through time. So a story, a play, a movie, any kind of visual art, like it's a sigil that is continually moving forward and changing things as it moves through time. And with the Invisible specifically, he really tied that storyline to himself and works that he was trying to do. And as the one character in particular within the Invisibles, he started writing the character having health problems, and he developed all those health problems.
Yeah, King Mob, that was him. He put himself into the comic book. And yes, that's why Grant Morrison dressed up with all leather, bald head, designed his character to be like that. And all of a sudden he's like, I want my character to fall in love with a bunch of hot redheads. And so in his life came a bunch of hot redheads. And I think it's really fascinating to see the dangers of these things, because he started not ever having to have a real relationship because he didn't understand the underpinnings of how magic works. It's like, unless you're descriptive, you're just going to get a bunch of hot redheads who are going to run all over your heart and then fall away eventually. And then, he hurt himself in the comic, and then he hurt himself there, thus saying, I will never hurt myself again in the comic because I don't want to be in the hospital for the last week. Marks? Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say Philip K. Dick, he also wrote himself into his work and projected exactly how he was going to die. And so, when you're using these mechanisms, these vehicles of the creative force, you really have to be aware of the intensity and the power that they possess.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a magician named,
Mm-hmm.
or occultist, Aidan Wachter, who in one of his books, and I cannot remember the Changing Fate or Tempting Fate, something about fate. Weaving Fate is the name of the book. And he presents a hypersigil idea with journaling, where he incorporates some folk magic ideas, and there's like you get your book that you're going to write in, and you go to the crossroads at midnight and summon the devil, and it's a whole thing. But then you treat that book like your diary, basically. And every day you come home and you write about your day, but you write about your day as if you were living the life that you actually wanted. So like if I really wanted to be a flight attendant, I would come home from my retail management job and be like, man, today was really rough at the airline, but this worked out well. And I got to meet all these great people on the flight, and this flight was delayed, but we ended up getting to go to this other destination. And so you're basically, he calls it telling true lies. You're writing the life you want as if it was already happening. Which is, I think, where one thing about that differentiates chaos magic is there is the fuck around, but there is definitely the find out, and we tend to learn our lessons that way. So we look at the hypersigils of Grant Morrison and Philip K. Dick and the effects that those hypersigils had on their health and well-being. And then we look at Aidan Wachter's hypersigil, which is, I've learned lessons from what they went through. And so we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it in a way that benefits us and doesn't injure ourselves or ruin our love lives.
Does anybody have any more questions or anything?
Marks, you're muted.
That kind of gets into the old secretorium, where it's the whole idea of the manifestation process.
Dave, I have any other questions? All right. Thumper, was there anything that you would like to add about your book? Tell anybody about it.
I've actually had a blast tonight, and I feel like that I don't know if I have anything else I want to add. I think the only thing that I would say about the book itself is that, to quote Phil Hine, the Chaos Magician Phil Hine, magic should be fun. And so if and when people get a hold of the Chaos Apple, approach it as a tool to have fun with. Like the spells in the book, the experiments in the book. I would like people to take an enjoyment of magical practice out of it. So I hope that's what people get out of it.
Love it. That's great. It's supposed to be fun, right?
Absolutely. Otherwise, why do it?
Exactly. Yeah, I have to say, this was an awesome show. I had a great time, and it was really cool. And I really appreciate you coming on, man. I had a lot of fun for real. Yeah, and I guess we'll wrap it up. I honestly can't think of anything else unless somebody else has something that they want to mention real quick, but I'm good. So, Brandon, please let everybody know where they can find your stuff.
Oh, hey, great. Thank you, Thumper. Great to meet you, everyone. Golden Chaos Apple. Make sure it doesn't create chaos. Figure it out. Read the book. He's probably got it in there on how you're gonna walk through the chaos with a light step and a smile on your face. And always, Nick, thank you for having me on. I love these conversations. This is how we meet new people, and we're trying to find our way through this ocean of chaos. Head on over to Magus in the Media, because you should already be subscribed. That's all I got. Just go over to Instagram, go over to X. Make sure you follow every one of these people on this panel. We're trying to find myth, meaning, and magic in this strange, chaotic world. Again, thank you, Thumper, and I love everybody on this panel. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. Thank you for doing the intro, my man. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
Hell yeah. Please let everybody know what's up with you and what's up with all of your all the stuff that you do, all your endeavors. Are you muted?
Who's that?
Jin.
Oh, sorry, boss. That was
Yeah, it's
totally. I
okay.
didn't hear who you said. I thought it was Judith. I was like in my
No,
mind. I was
Judith.
like, oh, okay, I apologize. That's so my bad. So, thank you, Brandon. That was a really awesome both intro and outro little bars you dropped. So, thank you. You're making me
Thanks.
kind of look like a side, as like the side piece to the show now. Nick's never gonna ask me to do the intro again.
Oh, I love you, Jen.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Brandon and I are actually friends. So just keep that in mind,
Yeah,
everybody listening.
we are.
Yeah.
We really are friends. So thank you so much, Thumper. It was honestly a huge, like, it was like really cool to do this. I re-released, unfortunately, last year, almost at this time last year, one of the boys who I did the 5-part, the first series on Tracy Twyman, not on her biography, but on the metaphysics of her work. We did a 5-part series. Unfortunately, one of the boys passed away around this time last year. So I re-released his episode, gave it some new art, new keynote, a new hyper sigil, and I just dropped it on IG and X. So I encourage people to check it out. It's my 3rd episode I ever recorded on my show, and I love Zach. So shout out Zach, RIP, my brother. And people can check me out on Twitter at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, or on at Threshold Saints, which is both for IG and Twitter, and of course Substack. And you can check out all of our Grey Lodge work at thetruegraylodge.com, TRVE graylodge.com, because it's plus ultra all the way up. Yeah, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Brandon, of course, Robbie, Judith, and Mr. 93, Nick, and of course Thumper. Awesome show. Rock on, guys.
Yeah, that was a blast. And thank you very much for making it, Jen. I really appreciate it. And Robbie Marks, what is up? Please let everybody know where they can find your great stuff.
It was great hanging out with everybody, the old faces and the new faces. Good to meet you, Thumper. As far as my work, I'm currently working on illustrations for my Nimrod book, which I got about 8 or 9 of them complete. And then if you want to check out my various works, you can go to my Linktree, which is Linktree RMARX, and you can find my Meta Mindcast there, which I just did an episode on learning to lucid dream. I just released an episode on the creation of the human in the demon haunted world. And then the one this week was the bloodline of the first divine couple leading into the secrets of Enoch. So go over there and check out my Linktree and all the things that I have to offer. And again, Nick, I appreciate it as always. Thanks.
I always appreciate you here, Robbie. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Judith, please let everybody know.
Thank you for having me. Brandon, you're going to have to teach me how to do an intro like you do. It is awesome.
I would love to, Judith.
It's been a pleasure again, Jen, every time. Robbie, this is the second time I've been with you, so it's a pleasure. Thumper, thank you so much. I am actually going to get your book because from what Nick has said so far, I like your format, the way you present it. And I don't think you realize you also add a little element, because I got to read the little intro, a little bit of discernment in there to advise people to use that. So I'm looking forward to that. And everyone else, you could find me on YouTube and on X as The Loon. And I do more self-awareness, more mindfulness, and working on yourself before you start taking work like this on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. I really appreciate you making it here. And Thumper, please, if you want to let everybody know what's up, let them know where you can find anything yours that you want to promote, and the book, please.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. I had an absolute blast. I tend not to know how periods work, so I will just steamroll through a conversation.
That's great.
I really enjoyed being here. You can find me at thumperforge.com or pretty much anywhere at Fivefold Law, one word, Fivefold Law. And I am currently working on the first draft of my next book, which will be sort of a spiritual sequel to the Chaos Apple, while getting more into world mythology and pop culture. One thing I did forget to say about the Chaos Apple, just so people know what they're getting into, some of the pages are intentionally upside down.
Oh yeah.
People have caught that. My only 1-star review on Amazon came from somebody who thought he got a misprint. So I want people to know that that was done on purpose. But yeah, that's that Fivefold Law everywhere, thumperforge.com. And I will wander back here anytime you want me.
No, I definitely had a blast. And I noticed that too with the upside down, but like, I mean, I don't know. For me, I just knew that was done on purpose. I just didn't, yeah. Especially because it was also it's also like I think it's the Discordian parts, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was Discordian dance breaks and just little sort of stop and reorient and think about things in a different way. And it was actually somebody on the design team at the publisher came up with the idea. And I wasn't entirely sold on it. So I went to my most like grumpy, curmudgeonly friend. And I said, hey, if some of the pages in the book were upside down, what would you think? And he said, I think that would mean that I should stop and reorient and change the way I'm looking at it. I was like, we're sold. So yeah, everybody, for the most part, everybody seems to get it, but I always sort of offer that disclaimer. So people aren't too thrown.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. But yeah, please, people. I I said before, the book to me it reads differently. It's not going to be to me, it's not your everyday magic book. You know, I think it's a little bit more personal. I don't know. I liked it so far from what I read. I highly suggest it. If you're into chaos magic, I feel like if I tell you to check this book out, it's not going to be like every other book you read. So check it out if you're into that stuff. And Thumper, amazing. Again, I was very happy for being on. If you coming on, we'll definitely get you on in the future if you ever want. I had a blast, so I would love to get you back on again. And thank you everybody that showed up, and thank you everybody in the chat. There was a lot of people on chat, and that's what's up, and that's why we do it live. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.